You can now support Ghost Maps on Patreon. Simply look for We Are HANTU or click the link in the description. Inspired by an account from Mayuri. Ghost Maps, entry 116, Rangpur, Bangladesh. It's the Hungry Ghost Month yet again, a time when the barriers between our world and the spirit world are thinnest. It's the perfect time for me to be conducting interviews with a whole family of spirits. I'm sitting at a coffee shop in Seletar that's visited by very few people. The auntie who runs the drink stall places a freshly made cup of kopi on my table, then heads back to her stall. She hasn't said a word all night, even when I placed my order. Even though I know she sees me speaking with, well, I don't really know what she sees. Henry, the spirit of an old man who's been the go-between for me with the rest of his family, takes a seat beside me. The chair doesn't move. I ask him if he's finally going to tell me his story. "What is your rush?" he asks. I tell him that I don't know how long I'll have this newly developed gift, my third eye that allows me to see spirits. He chuckles heartily. "You should know better than most that this isn't a gift that just goes away," he says. I tell him that I'm unsure how I got it, that the circumstances are very different from most people's. "It doesn't matter," he smiles. "If you've been gifted the third eye, it means you are destined to have it." I start to wonder what this means for me. Moving forward, how this will affect Ghost Maps. But Henry doesn't give me the chance to get too introspective. "Get lost in your thoughts in your own time, young man," he laughs as he stands up and steps aside. "It's Manzoor's turn to tell you a story." Manzoor is a middle-aged man, dressed in a proper, presentable shirt and trousers ensemble from the early 20th century. He greets me warmly as he appears out of thin air. He takes Henry's place and sits upright. I confess to him that I'm relieved. My last interviewee was rather dour, so it was nice to speak to someone a little more upbeat. "I wasn't always like this," he tells me. "In fact, for the first few decades of my afterlife, I was a bit of a terror." He smiles, but I can tell that he's a bit embarrassed, which is the perfect opportunity for me to flip my notebook back open and ask him to start from the beginning. The beginning for Manzoor, or more specifically, the end of his life, was 1915. His death came at the hands of an Englishman who falsely accused him of theft. "Of course, nothing happened to the lying bugger," he says, practically spitting at the thought of his demise. So you can imagine that I wasn't the nicest of spirits. Manzoor haunted his neighborhood in what is now Rangpur in Bangladesh. though he admits that haunted wasn't exactly the best word to describe his existence. He didn't bother the other residents for the most part, at least within those first few decades. Unfortunately, he couldn't expect the same in return. "If anyone got close to me, I'd shove them away," he says, then adds with a scowl, forcefully. "In the end, even if I had no interest in haunting anyone, I still created this atmosphere of fear." And that atmosphere remained until the late 40s. The stories of the violent ghost were not altogether lost, even amidst the political and social upheaval of the time. When things eventually settled down somewhat, Manzo found himself residing in a fairly large, then empty house. To ensure his privacy, he had thrown some furniture around a couple of times to frighten off potential buyers. And it had worked for a while. He finally found some level of peace. But then a family of 8 moved in. 6 kids, their doting but stern mother, and their very stubborn father. The man was slightly older than Manzo was when he died, and he would not be frightened off, despite Manzo's best efforts. Manzo threw furniture across the room. He smashed the windows and broke down doors. When that didn't work, he destroyed the man's favorite items instead. The man loved music, so Manzo demolished his radio and hand-carved flute. After all that, though, the man still refused to leave. Frustrated, Manzo started to shove him day after day, though he left the man's wife and children alone. None of this fazed the man. Angry at what he felt was injustice, Manzo felt a darkness grow inside him, one that he couldn't ignore. It felt good to let the darkness fester. It felt right. After all, didn't he deserve his peace at long last? Didn't he deserve to enjoy the life that had been denied him by that English scum? The darkness grew out from him. Soon, Manzo felt more corporeal than he had before. Night by night, it enveloped him bit by bit. It blinded him till soon all he could see was the darkness. Then, one night, the man had started to fall ill, and no one knew why. Not his wife, nor his eldest daughter and son. The man's wife did what she could to nurse him back to health, but she had an entire household to take care of as well. So, she wasn't particularly surprised when on this particular night, she heard him groaning in pain from their room. What she was concerned about, though, was how loud the groans were. She opened the door, damp cloth in hand, and let out a terrified scream. Standing over the man, barely illuminated by the lantern's glow from the bedside table, was a shadow. A figure in the shape of a person. Its thin fingers pressed against the man's forehead, like some kind of insect perched upon him. What the woman didn't realize was that this shadow was Manzo. Or more accurately, my anger, he tells me, quietly. In that quiet, though, I still hear it. Just a hint of it. That darkness. It's gone the next moment, but I can understand why the man's wife was so gripped by terror. The woman called for her eldest children, who came running. Together, they rushed into the room towards the man. The moment they entered, however, the shadow that had been Manzo vanished. Taking this as the last straw, the woman started to place pieces of iron under every pillow in the house. The belief was that iron would ward off malicious spirits, says Manzo. And she was right. Manzo, unable to withstand the iron, found himself lurking in the trees just outside the house. He was more miserable than he'd ever been since his death. But it also allowed him the time to dispel the darkness within him, to find peace, not in silence, but in himself. It took me 10 human years, he says. I was still violent with passers-by, but less with each passing year. Finally, Manzo took a hesitant step back into the house and found that he was welcome. By then, the men's children had all moved out, Manzo tells me. Him and his wife were already planning to move out too. Manzo knew that the man couldn't hear him. Nevertheless, on the man's last night in the house, Manzo whispered an apology. More for me than for him, I guess, he tells me. But it's not like that anger has died down too much in Manzo. That remains clear. I almost offer to help him move on. I don't know how, but I want to. That righteous fury certainly is infectious. But I stop myself. This is a journey Manzo needs to take on his own. The Englishman responsible for my death left ages ago, he says, scowling. After reaping the benefits of my country first, of course. He tells me that he doesn't have the power to go beyond his own borders to look for the Englishman. If any of the colonizers' descendants set foot in Bangladesh, however, Manzo will still be waiting. In the meantime, whenever he sees injustice, even now, he will not hesitate to act, sometimes just as violently as he did before. But mostly, he figures that the best revenge he could have against that man who caused his death is to at least try and find the peace he was never allowed in his life. Manzo stands, maintaining his upright posture, bids me farewell, and vanishes. Henry steps forward again. "You might want to wrap it up soon," he says. I look at my watch and realize that it isn't the evening anymore, but already 5 in the morning. Time for one last interview. I ask Henry if he would like to take a seat, and he smiles. If you want to discover more of Southeast Asia's other side, subscribe now and follow us on social media. You can also be one of our supporters on Patreon. Look for We Are HANTU or click the links in the description. Ghost Maps is a HANTU production created by Kyle Ong and Wayne Ray, with art direction by Jolene Lim, and recorded on Audio Technica mics.